Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of Let's Talk Pot. My name is Sherry Egland. I'm the Associate Director at Omni Youth Programs. I'm glad to be with you again here today. Again, my name is Sherry Egland. I had a little blip there, so I'm not sure if the first part of what I said was missed, so I'll repeat it. My name is Sherry Egland. I'm the Associate Director here at Omni Youth Programs in Sacramento, California. We are an agency that focuses on preventing youth use of alcohol and marijuana. Normally, we go out to the community and speak at different events and go into classrooms and work with young people and parents. But with COVID happening, we've switched some of it to online. So that's what our talks have been about. And we are just giving some information about marijuana that isn't as widely available. And just to make sure everybody understands, we predominantly talk about marijuana as it pertains to youth use, and that's what we're trying to prevent. We're not worried about legalization or anything like that, but our concern as an agency is that there's a lot of information out there that is important to know. If somebody does decide that they're legally allowed and want to use the substance of marijuana, that they understand that there are some risks that they're taking. So today specifically, we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about withdrawal, and then we're going to talk about overdose, because both of those things do occur with marijuana. There obviously, I know usually when we think about overdose and withdrawal, we think about, the horror stories of what people have to go through when they're rehabbing from heroin or cocaine or meth or harder drugs. And it's true, marijuana doesn't have as harsh, but it is very, very notable, some of the withdrawal and overdose symptoms. And it is also important to note that these symptoms are something that are fairly new. Because as we discussed before, marijuana, actually the THC, which is the part that gets you high, it's the psychoactive part. Basically the THC part is what gets you high, and the CBD part doesn't have any high effect. Well, lately with legalization happening, the amount of THC has kind of skyrocketed. It used to be about 1 to 3% in the 50s and 60s. Now today, in plant form, it can be 25 to 35%. And if you're using concentrates, the average is usually about 60% and can be all the way up to almost 100% THC. So that might be why we are all of a sudden seeing overdose and withdrawal symptoms that we haven't seen before. But a lot of doctors, if an emergency room, especially doctors and nurses, if you know any of them and talk to them, I'm sure they can share stories with you. That's who's mostly sharing their stories with me about some of these symptoms. So let's get right into it. We'll start first with withdrawal. It is important to note that marijuana can be an addictive substance. It's true that it isn't always. Studies show that about 1 in 6 adults who use marijuana will become addicted. 1 in 10 adults, and it's 1 in 6 youth. So if you are using marijuana in your teen years or in your adolescent years, your chances of becoming addicted go up quite a bit. So your chances are 1 in 6 if you're a young person. Now that goes up significantly if you're using marijuana more. It kind of makes sense. The more you use it, the more likely you're going to become addicted. They say for daily users, most of the studies show that the rate of becoming addicted goes up to about 50%. So that means, for every 5 teens that use, 2 or 3 will become addicted. So that is a pretty high number. So that's also why, because it's an addictive substance, that's why sometimes withdrawal symptoms can be part of it. So we thought it was important for everybody to know what those withdrawal symptoms might be. So if you're somebody who has used marijuana or do use marijuana and you're experiencing some of these symptoms, it's important to note that it might be because of withdrawal. And it's important that if you are seeing a doctor because of any of these symptoms, that you share with them about your use. Remember, everything that you share with the doctor is confidential. So even if you're under the age of 21 and kind of nervous about doing that, I can't overstate the importance of being honest with your doctor about your use, so that they can give you the best information possible. So some of the withdrawal symptoms include, one of the first things that happens is you get a diminished appetite, meaning that you're not as hungry. You don't feel like eating. Hey, it's been a long time since I've eaten, and you just don't feel like doing that. Mood changes are a really big one. And it's interesting to note that with marijuana, a lot of the withdrawal symptoms are more psychological, meaning kind of with your mood and irritability and anxiety. They're more with that than they are the physical withdrawal symptoms. There's a lot of sleep difficulties involved, including insomnia. Severe headaches is one of the most common ones when you're withdrawing, and of course, cravings for marijuana. And it's interesting that sometimes the things that are causing the sleep difficulties or causing the anxiety can be related to your use of marijuana, especially if you're using high THC content. So it's kind of a cyclical, a chasing your tail kind of a thing. If you're using marijuana to get sleep or using marijuana because you're anxious, you can actually be increasing your ability to not be able to sleep and increasing your anxiety because you're using marijuana more. Sweating and cold sweats and chills are another form of withdrawal. Also depression, which is difficult because I know that's something now, especially with isolation, that young people are dealing with and everyone is dealing with right now. Not being able to just be in the presence of our friends and family as much as we'd like to can leave people feeling isolated. But it's important to know that you don't want to turn to marijuana to try to help yourself with those feelings of depression, because it actually, studies show over and over again how THC works with our brain. It can make your depression worse in the long run. It initially might feel a little bit of relief because it's given that shot of THC and dopamine to your brain, but in the long run, it's going to really confuse your brain, and your brain's not going to be able to have everything it needs to help you calm down or help you feel better when you're depressed. And it kind of makes sense. The longer you use marijuana, the more likely you're to experience withdrawal symptoms. Your brain basically just starts to really depend on that supply of THC, and it has to adjust to not having it. And again, you kind of sometimes have to be careful not to get into that circle of using marijuana to get rid of some of the symptoms of not using marijuana. You can kind of go round and round with that. Now, if you are somebody that has decided that has used marijuana or does use marijuana and you don't want to anymore, you've decided to quit, there's a few things to keep in mind if you are stopping the use. You want to make sure, medical experts say staying hydrated is really important when you're withdrawing from any substance, but especially marijuana. You want to avoid anything sugary or caffeinated if you can. You can choose it. I know it gets boring drinking water, but the more you can hydrate yourself, the better. And your body really needs fruits, vegetables, and protein to really, again, that's called brain food. And your brain is really trying to rewire itself once you've given it all this THC and you take it away. And finding support is really, really important. And I know this is boring, but exercise actually really helps. Exercise, I know, yawn, who wants to exercise? But exercise, you can get creative with it. It doesn't have to be going to a gym, because we can't do that now. Just going outside, even for a 10-minute walk around the block, can really help your brain start to rebuild some of those endorphins it needs to help you through these withdrawals. There are detoxification centers available if you're deciding to quit marijuana. It's kind of difficult now with COVID. A lot of those aren't open. But a lot of the treatment centers are open, and the rehab centers. And it doesn't mean it's not something where you have to check in and stay. They have kind of in and out privileges and they can help you kind of detoxify. Or just talk to your doctor. Let your doctor know that have used marijuana, you are using, you think you're experiencing some of the symptoms of withdrawal, and you kind of want help with that. They're a great support for that. Excuse me. There's also some pretty cool apps out there. Because it's hard to actually get in touch with somebody now, a lot of the treatment centers are doing stuff over the phone, or like I said, apps. There's one called Supportive. It's SUPPORTIV. It's kind of a weird spelling, but if you look that up on your phone, that's a pretty good app for helping yourself quit. There's also the I Am Sober app. But if you just Google sober apps, there's a lot of actually pretty good ones out there, and you can look and research maybe which one will be best for you. I also have this kind of Pretty cool. I didn't make this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this in the chat section as soon as I'm done, and I'm going to post this on our Facebook page, and it kind of gives you what some of the withdrawal symptoms are and a little timeline of when you can expect to experience those things. So I'm going to make those available as soon as we're done here today. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to post those over in the chat box over there. Cynthia, thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate that. It's so great to hear from you. The next thing we're going to talk about is kind of a serious subject, and it's a little bit gross. I'll give you a little a little precursor there. Some of the stuff to dealing with marijuana overdose is kind of concerning. Marijuana overdose can result in a lot of serious symptoms. A lot of them that I talked about with the withdrawal symptoms, you can see. Sometimes they call it greening out, but you can pass out from smoking too much marijuana or using too much marijuana. A lot of the same things we see with alcohol are similar to marijuana, but here's the thing. Marijuana has much stronger effect on your brain than it does actually on your physical functions. So a lot of the overdose things are hallucinations, not being able to concentrate. One of the biggest things that people report are losing their peripheral vision. And what that means, like right now, if you want to stick your hands out like this and you're looking straight ahead at me at the computer, but you wiggle your fingers like this to the side of your head, and even though you're looking straight ahead, you can kind of see when your fingers are moving and when they stop, even though you're the one doing it. That's your peripheral vision. That's one of the most common things that actually that they report disappearing when you're overdosing on marijuana. So again, you can imagine that's another reason why it's really important to not drive or drive with somebody who's been using marijuana or who does use marijuana regularly. It really slows down your reaction time as well. Your ability to recognize colors also can happen with marijuana overdose. And on to the more serious, and this is kind of, again, something new that never existed before, and maybe in the last 5, 8, not quite 10 years, there's something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. Long name, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. We're just going to call it CHS for the rest of the talk today, because it's too much of a mouthful to say that every time. But Cedars-Sinai, which is a really important research hospital, has done a recent study on this, and they came out with some pretty interesting information that I'm going to share with you today. But if you want to know more about cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, if you hear me talking about this and think that might be you, please contact your doctor right away. You could definitely call them over the phone, let them know you just heard about this and you do use marijuana and you think that this might be something that is that you're having an issue with. Because it is true that the medical community, a lot of doctors know about this, but not all do. If you Google cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, especially if you Google problems with or testimonials, a lot of times people will share stories that they went to their doctor over and over again with some of the symptoms, and the doctor was not able to identify what the problem was because they didn't know about cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So what are the symptoms? Here it is. If you're suffering from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, CHS, it means that you have a cyclical vomiting, which means this is the gross part, throwing up constantly, almost over and over again, and you have severe, really difficult, hard stomach pain. And the pain is something that caused some ER nurses, actually it was an ER nurse that coined the term scromiting. They call cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome scromiting because you're screaming in pain and vomiting over and over. When this first started happening, doctors weren't sure what to make of it because none of the treatments that they usually use for a nausea and vomiting worked. What they did find out, though, is that everyone suffering from CHS is a frequent marijuana user. And the only thing that they found to stop it is actually stopping using marijuana. So I'm going to get a little more into it, but here's basically what happens with CHS. It does result from frequent use of marijuana because your brain, basically, marijuana has the opposite. You think of marijuana as something that sometimes people take for nausea. That's one of the first medical uses for it, was for people who had chemotherapy and needed help with their appetite and were very nauseous. Marijuana can help that. So it actually is anti-nausea for your brain. But here's the weird thing is in your digestive tract, marijuana has the opposite effect. It makes you more likely to have nausea and vomit. Um, your digestive tract basically has a lot of molecules in it that bond to THC. They like THC for some reason and they grab onto it. So it really can affect your digestive tract. For example, some of the things that cedar cyanide says that it can change the time that it takes the stomach to empty. It also affects the little band of muscle that opens and closes to let food basically from your esophagus into your stomach. It can affect that. It isn't clear, they haven't figured out exactly why heavy marijuana users get this, but they do know that this syndrome only occurs in people who are frequent users. There's a couple of different phases to this. Phase 1 of CHS is you kind of just have that early morning, or they call morning sickness. Men do. This isn't a pregnancy one, but this is similar to morning sickness when you're pregnant. You kind of have that early morning nausea. You don't feel good. You don't feel like eating when you wake up. And as the day goes on, you kind of start to feel a little better. So people usually have normal eating periods at this time. And here's the hard part is some people think marijuana is going to help their nausea, so they start actually using it more. So phase 1 of CHX can actually cause people sometimes to increase their intake of marijuana, which might be why some of the symptoms are getting worse. So then, and it's important to note that first phase can last for months or years. They're saying you can have this for years, and this is again goes into people going to their doctors and not bringing up the option of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So it's really important if you do use marijuana and you're suffering from that, that you let your doctor know. So phase 2 is when the vomiting takes over. Vomiting is very intense and overwhelming. It's very ongoing. It's repeated. You have a lot of belly pain, weight loss symptoms, symptoms of dehydration. The same symptoms you have with dehydration will start to happen. A lot of people start taking really, really hot showers or baths because for some reason they're finding that helps alleviate the nausea and some of the stomach pain. In fact, I was at a conference and spoke to an emergency room here close where we are at UC Davis in their burn center. And they said they've had several people coming in with burns into their burn unit from scalding themselves, from having these hot baths and showers because they have CHS, which is kind of scary. But what happens there is hot temperature affects the part of your brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is really kind of regulates our vomiting, basically helps us with that. So they think that that might be why, because the hot temperature affects the hypothalamus, which affects you hopefully not throwing up. But this phase basically happens until the person stops using marijuana. And hopefully they stop because they don't want the pain and they don't want to throw up all the time. And then the recovery phase starts. During that time, usually the symptoms go away and normal eating is possible again, but it can take anywhere from days to months for this to happen. And here's the tricky thing. Some people, I've actually read online testimonials of people that have had CHS. They've stopped using marijuana for 3 to 4 months and they're feeling better. And they think, well, maybe I'm okay to use again. Turns out not. Symptoms often come back in people that once you have CHS, it seems to be something you're always going to have. If you ever use marijuana again after getting diagnosed, your symptoms are going to start up again. And again, remember, CHS is only recently discovered, so there's still a lot that we don't know about it, and not a lot of healthcare providers, some of them don't know about it. But something that has recently come to my attention that is the biggest reason I'm talking about this today is because CHS can actually result in death. And this isn't something you're hearing about a lot. And that's because of the severe dehydration that it causes. And it also, because of that severe dehydration, it results in a type of kidney failure. And that's usually what people die from. They have CHS and they're so severely dehydrated and their kidneys are so severely disrupted that it can result in death. It's actually kind of upsetting, a little bit of a tearjerker, but if you do Google testimonials of CHS, there's parents talking about losing their teenagers to CHS. They've actually died from it, and even adults have. There's actually a testimonial from a sort of famous cannabis person that she's an online presence, and basically what she does is review cannabis edibles and cannabis products, and cannabis meaning marijuana with THC. And she's been pretty outspoken about her diagnosis of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. She spent about, she said, about $20,000 before the doctor realized what she had. And the only thing that made her feel better was stopping using marijuana. And you can imagine, if this is how she makes her money, that was really difficult for her. So she decided to start trying again after being okay for about 4 months. And she says she had the mildest thing that she could think of, and she's a pretty experienced user. And immediately her symptoms started up again. And interestingly, she thought, okay, maybe I can just switch to using CBD, eliminate the THC, and maybe I'll be better. Turns out no. As soon as she tried some CBD tea, she got those same symptoms. And I don't want to totally, I'm not going to say her name because my job here isn't to throw shade, but I do find it interesting that even though this has happened to her, and she talks about it openly, and she says that she's not going to use marijuana anymore because she doesn't want the CHS to eventually, kill her, and nobody likes throwing up all the time, but she still is out there promoting cannabis products. So that was kind of interesting to me, and something that should be taken a little bit with a grain of salt. If somebody basically makes money off you using or not using a product, you probably should really pay attention to the information that they're giving you. So again, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome doesn't happen all the time for sure. It's not like you smoke marijuana and you're going to get it, but it is something that you need to be aware of, and parents need to be aware of. Because a lot of the parents I've read on their testimonials online, they had no idea this even existed. They're rushing their teen to the emergency room because they're losing consciousness and vomiting a lot, and having no idea that the use of marijuana might be the problem. And apparently the treatment for CHS is very specific because it does affect the kidneys, and that's not ultimately apparent a lot of times when you go to the doctor. So again, we just want to arm you with as much information as possible. I know this is one of the scarier. I don't like to use scare tactics. That's definitely not something that I think is valuable. But because no one talks about this as far as I know, I haven't heard about CHS in the news. It's something that's not really out there. And that kind of bothers me because I really feel like people need the most information they can have. They really need as much information as they can have before they make a decision whether or not to use a particular substance, especially marijuana. So that's really my goal in sharing this information with you, is so hopefully you or someone you love or know starts to experience some of these symptoms. You might want to suggest that they talk to their healthcare professional about their marijuana use and talking about how they might get some treatment for helping that. So I thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Chris, thank you so much for your comments. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Again, I am going to post those withdrawal symptoms. That's a really helpful little thing. And Cynthia, you're so sweet, commenting all the time. And Mike, thank you so much. But my email is totally available. You can message me through our Facebook page, or I'm going to put my email actually right now on the chat box. It's sherry@omniyouth.net. If you have any questions about anything that I've shared, or you want, I'm happy to do a presentation via Zoom. I know that's what everything is now. If you have a meeting or anything coming up at your organization, or some kind of group that you're a part of, I'd be happy to do that. I am going to make this video available on both our YouTube page and our Facebook page. So if you found something interesting in it that you think you would like to share with other people, feel free to do that. But we're coming to the end of our time here, and I thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And again, please email me with any comments or questions. I really love hearing from you. And I think right now I am going to try to post the withdrawal symptoms if I can. I don't know if it's going to work, so I'm going to try it here really quick. Everybody bear with me. Cross your fingers. Let's see if it works. I'm going to try to put it in the chat box. No, it didn't like it. So I will post it on our Facebook page as soon as we're done. I couldn't put it in the chat box, so I'll do it on our page. Thanks so much for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye-bye.